Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. The U.S. president will be in Charleston, South Carolina on Friday. He's going to deliver the funeral eulogy for the Reverend Clementa Pinckney, the pastor of Mother Emanuel Church, one of the 9 victims of a shooting spree inside an emblematic house of worship for African Americans. When Barack Obama first spoke on the shooting last week, some saw an air of resignation as he openly sighed about Congress's inability to restrict gun laws and America's inability to cower racism and hate. But by the time Obama used the N-word in a Monday interview with a popular podcast, there seemed to be more movement. Not so much on guns, but on intolerance. We're going to look at his choice of words and at Walmart's decision to remove Confederate flags from its stores. This after the Republican governor of South Carolina herself ordered the legislature to get working on taking it down from in front of the state capitol. A website apparently created by accused gunman Dylan Roof includes a manifesto embracing white supremacy and photographs of himself holding a Confederate flag and a handgun. Just how far is South Carolina and the Deep South going to go to tackle prejudice in the wake of this attack? Today in the France 24 debate after Charleston, with us to talk about it from the capital, Columbia, Don Doyle, who teaches history at the University of South Carolina. Many thanks for being with us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Also joining us, former journalist Ricky Stevenson, president of Paris Black Tours. Thank you very much for being with us again.
Thank you.
Barack Obama just explain for our world audience, the N-word. It's
a word that was used for hundreds of years by those who would enslave Africans to describe them. It's a word that was used for hundreds of years. The last thing black men heard, or women, or children, before they were burned, lynched, beaten. It's a word that was used to just denigrate black people. And unfortunately, it's become a word that we hear all too often. And I think the fact that President Obama used that word was just his utter frustration.
All right, you say all too often, but it's certainly the first time we've heard him use it since he was elected president. This is in an interview in Los Angeles with the popular WTF with Marc Maron podcast.
It's not just a matter of it not being polite to say nigger in public. That's not the measure of whether racism still exists or not. It's not just a matter of overt discrimination. Societies don't overnight completely erase everything that happened 200 to 300 years prior.
Ricky Stevenson, were those the right words to use?
I think it showed his frustration. President Obama has been one of the best presidents we've ever had in my lifetime. And imagine how many times he's been called that word. And so for the first time for him to use that word, and we know millions of times he's been called that word, I don't think that's a big deal. In fact, I was watching CNN last night, sorry to talk about your competitor, and I was so sick of hearing they lost their minds talking about the president use this word, that I turned to my station, to France 24, because you were talking about news. And I honestly think he was just angered and frustrated that all of these things has happened. This is just, the horrible tragedy of 9 people being shot and killed by this racist in South Carolina, this racist white boy in South Carolina. But just think of all of the blacks who, thanks to cell phone video, we've seen how the police have lied about, well, I feared for my life, or that person took my gun. And we find out when we look at the videos that that's not the case. And I think it was just President Obama saying, I've had enough. And it's not, it's not just removing the polite, is it polite or not to use the N-word, which I will never use, but what else is happening in this society when in America, a 14, 15-year-old girl can be beaten by a police officer and there's no hue and cry? That, to me, is his frustration.
Well, there's certainly hue and cry this time.
Yes.
Don Doyle, first of all, your reactions to the tone of the language employed by the president where you are. What are people saying about it where you are?
I haven't heard as much talk about that. We are all talking about this flag that stands in front of the State House and has been a symbol of resistance to segregation for more than 50 years. And I think what I heard President Obama say was that people, at least in polite company, no longer use that word. It used to be used openly in political speeches and in common discourse, maybe not in the newspapers, but in conversations. And what he was saying is that may have subsided, the language of insult and provocation, but that the racism is still latent, it still emerges, and we've seen some of the worst of it here in South Carolina this last week. I have to say that we're also, I think, seeing some of the best of interracial spirit of moving forward in South Carolina today. I'm very hopeful that we are going to make some progress on this flag issue. It's only cloth, it's only symbolic, but it's like language. Symbols and language mean a lot. And I think that you're seeing a turn, a change of mood, and a new awareness.
Let's talk about that. The governor of South Carolina warning that if the legislature doesn't move to pass a bill to take down the Confederate flag in front of the State House, she'll call everyone back for a special session.
That flag, while an integral part of our past, does not represent the future of our great state. The murderer, now locked up in Charleston, said he hoped his actions would start a race war. We have an opportunity to show that not only was he wrong, but that just the opposite is happening. My hope is that by removing a symbol that divides us, we can move forward as a state in harmony, and we can honor the 9 blessed souls who are now in heaven.
Ricky Stevenson, this is the Republican governor of South Carolina speaking. Are you surprised that she's come out so forcefully?
No, I'm not. It's only what any conscious, principled, moral person would do. I was happy that Hillary Clinton came out and said the same thing. Mitt Romney. Actually, I've been surprised that other leaders have not said the same and that they have not weighed in on the tragedy of these 9 people being shot and killed, but also on the police, the road police, dirty police, and their actions against African Americans. It's been horrendous. We have been through a horrendous year based on cell phone video. And I just think that it's time for people to step forward. We're hurting ourselves in America.
But when you hear Don Doyle saying that there's been a lot of positive things to come out of South Carolina this week.
Yes. There needs to be more positives. That Confederate flag was a symbol of slavery. South Carolina lost the Civil War, was among those that lost the Civil War. Why are they still pushing it down our throats? I truly believe that it's time for white Americans, it's time for whites around the world to speak out against the diabolical things that are happening to people of color.
Immediately after the shooting, Don, there was, it seems, a very polarized debate in the United States over hate and racism and the way that the actual shooting had been portrayed in the media. And now, though, we've seen statements like the one from Nikki Haley, the governor of South Carolina. Were you surprised by her words?
Yes, I was, and I want to give her some credit, and I also want to analyze this a little politically because she exceeded my expectations. I didn't vote for her. She's a pretty conservative kind of business Republican, and I say that with respect. She's not a far right wing social cultural issues Tea Party type Republican. I think that she saw this. I think she was genuinely moved, first of all. I think she was moved by the tremendous sympathy that she felt for the victims. I think that she was horrified by this monstrous person who kind of came out of the swamps and massacred these people. And those images of the Confederate flag, I think she realized if she didn't before, that was now, whatever it was before, it was such a distasteful symbol that I think she also saw this as an opportunity that she might be able to move the state of South Carolina off of this dead center kind of, not indifference, but just a kind of paralyzed position on this flag issue, which has been there for, as I say, 53 years. And I think she saw an opportunity to move this. And I want to add that she has political ambition. She can't be reelected to governor. I think she saw some of the leadership in the Republican Party, Mitt Romney, and then Jeb Bush, come out against the flag. And I think she saw an opportunity for herself as well. And I'm not saying this as a just purely cynical idea. I admire her courage and her leadership here, and I hope for the best and hope that she can deliver now on bringing the legislature
because
through.
that is a real question. Our correspondent was saying that the legislature will need a 2/3 majority to take down that flag. Is that going to be doable?
I think it's possible. I think what you're going to see is right now, as we speak, they're in the legislature discussing this. And I think you're going to see people who are, some of them are going to hold out and circle the wagons and say, we're not going to change, never. And others are going to say, now's the time. I just this morning had a conversation and television interview with a Republican from Clemson, and he is co-sponsoring the bill to bring down the flag and remove it from the state capitol grounds. And he's a pretty conservative guy, I'm sure, but he just thinks it's the right thing to do and the right time to do it. And I think that there will be a lot of public pressure. What strikes me is that this is something that is not just going on in South Carolina and Columbia and Charleston, but the world is watching this. I first heard about the Charleston shootings from a friend of mine in Paris who had heard the news and wrote to me because we had a long exchange after the Charlie Hebdo massacre. And he was writing in sympathy. He had just visited Charleston and was horrified to think that such violence could take place in such a beautiful city. And I've been getting calls from Seoul, Korea, from Paris, France, from Canada, from various places to talk about this. So the world is watching South Carolina, and I think that will put some favorable pressure on them to do the right thing.
I have to say, thank you, Don. I have to say that this flag issue is so almost insignificant. It's important as a symbol, but there's so many other things that are more important at this juncture. The president was also very frustrated by the fact that he has tried to get Congress to do something about legislation to limit gun control laws. To limit the use of handguns and illegal guns. And Congress hasn't moved. There's been such a lock by the National Rifle Association on the, I'll say, political and financial lock on the American politicians, that nothing happens. So we're going to have the flag removed, but what about all the guns that are still in the hands of crazy people?
Don Doyle, on that point, Walmart, which is the world's largest retailer, but it's also rooted in the South. It's a Southern institution, Walmart. It was born there, announcing they're taking away all their Confederate merchandising, Confederate flag merchandising, but I guess we won't be seeing them taking away guns and ammo.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That might be a next step in a perfect world or in a better world. I think that this is my hope, that what we are seeing here is a wedge going into the Republican Party. And that's the party that right now is the obstacle to any kind of reform on gun control. But I think that wedge is going to divide some of that hard right intransigent group who did not take a stand on the killings in Charleston or the flag in Columbia, and who are going to be isolated. They'll have their base of extremists. But I think the moderates, Nikki Haley, Jeb Bush, others who are reaching out toward the more moderate views of Americans, I think that they are probably going to come out of this winners. It remains to be seen.
And
but
that raises an important question on that, Don Doyle, which is when there was desegregation it happened not as a grassroots movement, but very much from above. It was the federal government that came in and basically enforced it, sending in the National Guard, making sure that schools were integrated and that whites-only signs went down. This time around, this is coming from people inside of South Carolina.
Yes, and it's a combination. The civil rights movement involved a strong grassroots movement out of black churches and the Martin Luther King, and if you've seen the movie Selma, it was grassroots, and it was the grassroots movement that put pressure on the federal government. And the true story is that the federal government, at least progressive elements of it, were encouraging that grassroots movement. Lyndon Johnson encouraged Martin Luther King to put pressure on him, on the government, to bring about change. And I think that's what's happening here, too. The NAACP deserves a lot of credit for this. They have stood valiantly for years calling for that flag to be removed. They imposed a boycott on South Carolina, and that has hurt the reputation as well as the pocketbook of South Carolina. And it didn't work immediately, but it created pressure, and it gave business people a reason to abandon the flag. And it's not just NAACP and liberals that are liberal whites that are calling for the flag to come down, but a lot of Chamber of Commerce types who see this as an unnecessary stain on South Carolina's reputation and an obstacle to good business in the state.
I'm hoping that this will also change laws. The disparity in the laws between the way black people are treated in the justice system and between the way white people are treated. Look at the way this young killer was babied. The police took him to a Burger King to get a hamburger after he had, and put a bulletproof vest on him to keep anybody from harming him. And yet we see police killing, putting chokeholds on people who are unarmed, not dangerous. And it's just amazing. I hope that there will be a change. I hope that people of conscience will begin saying, we've got to stop this. Not just the flag. That's nice. It's nice cover. But what about getting jobs for those people in South Carolina? What about having economic parity for those people in South Carolina? Many of them are they're exploited. They're having their land taken away from them. There are just so many issues in South Carolina that need to be addressed, all over the United States that need to be addressed, about the disparity in what happens to black people and what happens to white people. And it can't be just about the flag. Nice way to start off, but there's got to be more. What are we going to do about handguns?
All right, and certainly we're going to continue to follow the story. Ricky Stevenson, I want to thank you. Thank you, Don Doyle, for joining us from Columbia, South Carolina. Stay with us because our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon. James, we're talking about how much of a groundswell it's been inside of South Carolina. Of course, it's gone worldwide, this move to get rid of the Confederate flag outside of buildings in the south of the United States.
That's right. Let's take a look, Francois, at how that has played out on social media. Of course, images of Dylann Roof holding the Confederate flag certainly drove a lot of that conversation online and gave rise to the activism. We can see, I think now, the hashtag Take Down the Flag, which got an awful lot of shares on social media from associations and indeed just regular people. It became a real refrain across Twitter and other social media as well. Take the oppressive rag down off a tax-paying building. So the language actually got very inflamed and very passionate at times. Black Lives Matter, there you can see, was the Twitter handle that shared that particular sentiment. And you had people in the streets as well with the same slogan, take down the flag. My great-great-grandfather was a Confederate soldier, and I say, take down the flag. So some people saying, regardless of heritage. We're in 2015 with the contemporary political situations that we're dealing with, and that's not an argument. The Confederate flag is undeniably the flag of an apartheid state, and it always will be, says one Twitter user. Regarding the Confederate flag, it's roughly similar to, say, a French person saying they're proud to have supported the Vichy regime. So some seeking parallels, Francois, outside of the US context. And so there you go. There's an editorial piece here as well in the Boston Globe saying Lindsey Graham, one of the White House hopefuls for the Republican Party, he has shifted to the position that the flag should be taken down. And in fact, others too should adopt that position. This needs to go beyond just one or two candidates.
That's important. Don Doyle, let me ask you, has it been a pivot for Lindsey Graham, the senator who's running for president?
Well, he was there at the press conference that Nikki Haley gave yesterday, and he showed up and he stood by her side. But I must say he looked a little uncomfortable when it first came out, and people were asking him about how he stood on the flag. He said, "Well, people can revisit it if they want. I'm okay with that, but this is who we are." And I noticed that Nikki Haley took that phrase and kind of turned it inside out. She wrapped the cause of removal of the flag into an argument for this is who we are, that we come together in the face of a crisis like this, that we are people of faith, we are people of family, we are people who believe in our tradition, but not in offending one another. And she kind of wrapped that Southern culture around her argument for removing the flag. It was a masterful speech. It's really amazing to hear it.
Well, Francois, a lot of people are trying to get past this heritage versus hate sort of dichotomy and go back to the historical facts in these editorial pieces in particular. So just to start with the Boston Globe editorial, supporters of flying the flag have justified it as a tribute to the sacrifice of Southern Civil War soldiers, yet the state didn't raise the flag over the State House dome until 1962. Amid opposition to the civil rights movement. The Guardian as well underlining that very basic fact here, that this is not part of a 150-year continuous public recognition to celebrate the Civil War, but it was raised for the first time in 1961 and then by law in 1962 to demonstrate opposition to the federal government and racial integration. I mean, they're just the facts, really very difficult to run away from them. This is a cartoon also in the Boston Globe. Officials are still trying to fathom the roots of the shooter's hatred. You can see a reporter there. On front of the flag that is hoisted on the grounds of the State House. So I suppose really it's not as complex as all that really when you get back to the facts, Francois. But as USA Today points out, removing the Confederate flag won't be quick. And it won't be easy. And of course, you can see that's even embedded into certain flags in the South, such as the Mississippi flag. So even if you get rid of it in its original form, it's still present. It's very difficult to resolve those, I suppose, related problems. This is the soul singing legend, John Legend. I had to ask Mississippi flag to be moved out of my camera shot when I sang at the Super Bowl in front of all 50 state flags. So clearly, as I said, a complex problem. And you have other people on social media still, I suppose, banging that heritage drum, saying just because of one bad apple, it's not going to bring down the flag, not in my house. And that was General Lee, that television show from some decades back, which indeed had as one of the...
It's like the Dukes of Hazzard there.
Yes, well, the Confederate flag on the roof of that car. Yeah. So some people pointing out that really that somewhat childish attachment, you could say, or naive attachment, unaware of the historical facts, really, that sees people kind of attached to the flag, that's not going to be done away with, Francois, overnight.
Don Doyle, your students, are they aware of all of this?
Yes, and I would like to think that a younger generation that grew up in the post-civil rights South does not harbor this kind of grudge and resentment and are as embarrassed as any of us are by the attachments to the Confederate flag. They don't want to identify with that. It brands them as someone who is a redneck and backward and ignorant and lower class. But that's not always true, and I know that there are some who feel differently about that, even among our students. And this young man who committed these murders is, of course, 21 years old. And here he somehow, without much education, formal education, sopped up a lot of this ideology of hatred and white supremacy, and educated himself, if you will, on the internet in doctrines of hatred and violence, and without anything to counter that in his family or his school or church or neighborhood. He seemed to let that take control of him and act it out.
All right.
Again, I have to say, it'll be polite, it'll be a nice gesture to take down the Confederate flag, but until we get rid of handguns in the United States, nothing's going to change.
A heavy lift indeed on that score. Ricky Stevenson, many thanks. Thank you, Don Doyle, for joining us from Columbia, South Carolina. James Creedon.
Thanks, Francois.
Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.